This is probably going to be my longest segment today because, God, everyone's talking about Ukraine again. Everybody's finally talking about Ukraine again, but it's all just the worst. It's just all so bad. So bad. And at least we got aid on the pathway to success. Okay, let's talk about it. So Mike Johnson has finally released the bullet points of the Ukraine aid bill that he has proposed in not in competition, but separately from the Senate bill that was passed months ago, as Ukraine aid has been held up for the better part of 6 months. It's been held up actually since Kevin McCarthy was still House Speaker, if you guys can remember how long ago that was. But since then, it's just been a back and forth of, well, if you want Ukraine aid, well, I promise we won't invade Ukraine. You have to be able to pass immigration reform, and then they make a deal, and then it's like, never mind. Trump said he doesn't like this deal, so we're not going to pass this bill because either it didn't give us everything we wanted, which, I mean, it's a compromise, and Democrats control the Senate. I don't know if we expected, or it could give, from Trump perspective, a victory to Biden in an election year, and that's something that makes him nervous. And this has been delayed. And then we get the bill, and I look at it, and I read it, and the conclusion I walk away from reading the Mike Johnson proposal in comparison to the Senate bill is that it's the same bill. It's the same bill with a few minor alterations. I think $7.8 billion of the money will be loaned. Non-interest loans will be given for the financial aid. And it asks the president to like draw up a plan for victory in the next 45 days. Oh, one last thing, and it asks for ATACMS. It says the president should send ATACMS to Ukraine. It doesn't specify what ATACMS, so it can end up just being the M39 block, 165 kilometer ATACMS. And there's a loophole saying that if it threatens America's national security, never mind. But besides that, this is the same exact bill as the one put forward in the Senate. And there's even a good chance that this is going to end up, because one of the big things that separated it was the fact that they were going to be voting on the different things separately. And in the House, that's true, but then it's going to be bundled up and sent to the Senate and voted on all together. So it seems like it was only separated just so Republicans who were against it, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, can stand up and say, I voted my conscience against supporting our allies. Anyway, let's read these bullet points for any of you guys who've followed the Senate race for this bill or the aid debate. This all sounds particularly familiar. The Ukraine Security Supplemental Appropriations Act includes $60.8 billion to address the conflict in Ukraine and assist our regional partners as to counter Russia. $48.3 billion, or 79% of which, will fund the U.S. industrial base. Okay, so I heard from Mike Johnson on TV that 80% of it went to replenish our own stockpiles. And I heard that number, and I was like, that sounds like nonsense to me. And the reason it sounded like nonsense to me is because that would mean that this is no longer an aid bill to Ukraine. This would simply just be, oh, goody, we've bought ourselves some new goods from Raytheon. And it is true that some of the supplemental was always that, but he messed up his wording in that interview. So it was good that I sniffed that and was like, that smells funny. Because what he actually meant is that 79% of the money goes to the U.S. industrial base, meaning that we take money, we invest it in the industrial base, it then produces artillery shells, which we then ship to Ukraine. We take money, we give it to Raytheon, they produce a weapon, and then they send it to Ukraine, which builds up our industrial base and hires American workers. Now, it is true that investments into the military-industrial complex, on average, will reap less, I guess you could say, economic trickle effects throughout the rest of the economy, as if you were to invest this, say, in infrastructure and other areas, but it still has more benefits than, say, if all this money was to go into just a foreign country in their military-industrial complex. And so he has been using that as a kind of selling point for Republicans, many of whom also take money from many of these defense contracting companies and have many defense contracting companies working in their districts, both Democrat and Republicans. But let's read the points here, and then let's talk about the bizarre response to this, which has been kind of cathartic to me because I'm watching them respond, and I can tell by the way they're flapping in the water. No, not flapping in the water, flapping on the side of the road as if they've been jumped out of the pond and they're trying to get air, that the aid's probably getting through. Let's read the points. Converts all financial assistance to Ukraine government into a loan, which is true. That makes up $7.8 billion. Now, this again is a loan that the interest on does not accumulate. So we give them $7.8 billion and it stays $7.8 billion. So that's a positive. I will say that I've seen a few amendments that try to make it so that you cannot forgive this loan, which is how I look at it, because this is how I view it. After the war is over, Ukraine is going to be in an economically devastated state. And one of the best things we could do if we stand loaning them stuff is to take that economic burden off of them. And I would want the president, to be blunt with you from my perspective, to cancel that loan, because a stronger, more economically prosperous Ukraine that is taking its money to reinvest in its construction is going to be more useful to the United States. And it's just going to be better for the public there than one that's super worried about immediately making these payments. But again, they could be paid back at any date later in the future, so maybe they won't even need to have it canceled. But I've seen amendments. I think it was from Victoria Schwartz, if we can find where that is. Victoria Schwartz. I can't seem to find it. But yeah, I believe it was, oh, here it is. Victoria Schwartz. Nope, that's not it. Here it is. Victoria Spart's amendment to the Ukraine aid bill. The president is banned from forgiving loans to Ukraine without congressional approval. By the way, her hometown in Ukraine was bombed yesterday, Chernihiv, and 12 people died. Over 12 people died. Let's just say that she is not viewed very positively by those in her home country from the commentary I've seen from Ukrainians responding to the things she said on the House floor and in committee hearings. Anyway, let's continue. Requires the administration to submit to Congress within 45 days a strategy establishing specific and achievable objectives with metrics that define and prioritize U.S. national security interests. Basically, a plan for what would, in American terms, be victory. Whether that's going to be public or not public, I don't know. I hope it is public. And I do think this would be positive to have the Biden administration have to come forward and provide this. The Zelensky government, the Ukrainians have already provided like their pathway to victory by targeting Russian supply lines, etc. But the Biden administration has not really provided a total outline for this. So this isn't a bad part of it, but I am interested to see who's going to be leading the 45-day strategy effort before they give that to Congress. By God, please don't put Jake Sullivan on the case. Continuing, bolsters oversight through in-person monitoring requirements. Now, if this is true, now we already have monitoring in the storehouses where American officials will come to storehouses and check out the aid. But what happens is that aid a lot of times gets there and is sent to the front because the shortage is so bad before anybody can come by. And so that's a problem that I know that the aid effort and tracking of the aid has ran into. But if it's talking about bolstering in-person monitoring requirements, that's going to mean having more staff on the ground to monitor it, more State Department staff. And it could possibly mean getting that staff closer to the front, which could possibly endanger them. But it just says oversight, so it doesn't really get into the specifics. That's the stuff I'm going to nerd about. Requires partners and allies to pay their fair share through cost matching requirements, increases the fiscal limits on several presidential drawdown authorities. I don't like that because that's going to make the president have less flexibility when it comes to using presidential drawdown to support Ukraine. $13.4 billion to replenish American defense stockpiles. So that's the actual money that's going to just be going to replenish our own stuff. Of the bill. So it's not the 80% like you said on TV. It's actually just 13.4 out of the 60. $7.8 billion for current U.S. military operations in the region. So that means we've got $20 billion here together that isn't even going to Ukraine. It's going to the United States or going to U.S. operations of the $60 billion aid bill to Ukraine. Okay. $13.7 billion for purchasing U.S. defense systems for Ukraine. And $26 million for oversight and accountability of aid and equipment provided to Ukraine. It's honestly not that different. It's basically the same bill as before, and I certainly do not think they needed 6 months to hobble this together. It seemed like he just finally got cornered. The situation got so bad that he had no choice but to move on it, especially since they dealt with a lot of the fiscal negotiations that he was using to try to put it off, saying, oh, I got to deal with the budget before I deal with Ukraine aid. Let me just throw out there, House speakers usually have to deal with multiple things at the same time. Am I to believe that if there was a natural disaster while he was having fiscal negotiations, he'd have to be like, oh, I can only choose one? It was nonsensical. It was a parable excuse. The last House speakers, whether it be Newt Gingrich or Nancy Pelosi or Paul Ryan, all of them had to do more than one thing at a time. But this is the bill. So they cave to the Trump demand on the loan and make the financial aid a loan. So they caved to that Trump demand in comparison to the Senate bill. They talk about, and they're going to do the strategy thing that the Republicans have been asking for a while, provide a strategy. That's another, I guess you could say, concession. But that's basically it. That's it's basically the same bill, but they caved to some Republican demands after the fringe of the party threw a fit for months and months and months. And Biden has already come out and endorsed the plan. U.S. President Joe Biden urges the passing of aid bills in Washington Street Journal op-ed saying, we cannot let Putin succeed. Both Ukraine and Israel are under attack by brazen adversaries that seek their annihilation. Mr. Vladimir Putin wants to subjugate the people of Ukraine and absorb their nation into a new Russian empire. A census for Kiev has been blocked for political wrangling for months. So now, if you go further, he calls it like a strong and sensible plan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Mike Johnson's on board. The president's on board. They've been going back and forth over this for 6 months, and Republicans are still getting concessions, even if it's basically the same bill. And we have good reason to believe that if this were proposed probably 4 months ago, it would probably have gotten through then too. But even with those concessions, and with all of this delay and delay and delay, certain Republicans are still not happy. And they've been expressing that anger both on cable news and their podcasts, but especially through the amendments process. And I already talked about Victoria's amendment that's not being received well, but let's talk about Moscow Marjorie, and I'm just going to call her Moscow Marjorie from now on. And I know it's kind of like a Trumpian type nickname, but with the type of stuff she's pushing forward and with her statements about Ukrainians, harvesting baby organs and Russia defending Christianity in Ukraine, I don't know what else to call her, but in effect, a Russian asset in the United States. Even if she's not a purposeful Russian accent, you could call her a useful idiot in favor of the Russians and spreading the misinformation for them, whether they got it directly from the source. That means RT, Russian state media, or got it through the trickling down of that junk into social media. Either way, she's constantly pushing Russian propaganda. And there have been Republicans who have called this out. And we're going to actually look at a few of them later, calling out the spreading of this misinformation and Russian propaganda on the House floor, which is honestly pathetic. I wanted to go through a few of her amendments, though, to give you an idea of the type of last-ditch efforts that those who oppose support for our allies are trying to pull in order to try to undercut support for Ukraine at this vital, vital time in the war. Let's read a few of hers. Number 1, members who vote for Ukraine aid must conscript into the Ukrainian army. Number 2, by the way, can we pass something similar about aid to Israel? If you want to pass aid to Israel, you have to get recruited into the IDF. Will Marjorie Taylor Greene go join the IDF? Because she supports aid to Israel. So if the critique is, well, if you want to support them, you got to join their armed forces. Why does that double standard not apply to Israel? Why does Israel get special treatment in comparison to Ukraine in this worldview? It's not consistent. Number 2, Israel aid will be used for the development of space laser technology on the southern border. I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. I am not kidding. Listen, right here. By the funds made available by this act, sums as necessary shall be used for the development of space laser technology on the southwest border. It's like she doesn't even want to get away from the fact that she's a clown. It's like she's chasing the clownage. It's like she's trying to set new records and making a fool of herself. The whole joke is that she's a crazy space laser lady, and then the largest war in Europe breaks out, and she uses it as an opportunity to remind everybody that she's the fucking crazy Jewish space laser lady. And she's still pushing crazy space laser nonsense. Okay, continuing. There's so many. I don't want to get caught up for too long. Here's another one. No Ukraine aid can be expended until Ukraine closes all bio laboratories. None of the funds made available by this act may be obligated or expended until Ukraine closes all biolaboratories, provides all data on such research to the United States government. So Ukraine is not allowed to do biological research, even though it was a hub for scientific development in the space race during the Cold War, and is full of Soviet age scientists and scientists who have trained after the Soviet age and are doing research. They're not allowed to. Why? Because the Russians made rumors about biolabs that they've been unable to prove, and they used to accuse them of having weapon of mass destruction that they need to go in and remove. Where have you heard that before? And all of these people who are the most brilliant alternative media sourcing, anti-establishment, I mean, they're in the know. They're not sheeple. They don't listen to the establishment mainstream media narratives. Immediately runs to another country, a dictatorship, and just accepts their mainstream media narrative calling for weapons of mass destruction being in the United States. They need to invade. And all these people say they wouldn't have been fooled. They wouldn't have been fooled by the presentations by the United States government when it comes to WMDs in Iraq. All these people are gonna say that, oh no, they're not gonna listen to all of the OPSEC, all of this, not the OPSEC, all these psyops going after you. No, they're gullible, they're stupid, they're just gullible and stupid for a different side because they distrust their own government. Anyway, continuing. No Ukraine aid can be expended until Tony Blinken provides a report certifying that churches in Ukraine are able to operate free of government interference. So, to be clear, we've been blocking Ukraine aid for half a year, and all of a sudden we're going to send Ukrainians a piece of paper saying, hey, we can't send you aid until we go examine all of your churches and make sure everything's okay. How long will that take? A month? 3 months? 4 months? Who knows? Anthony Blinken has to go up there and figure it out, though. By the way, can I say, she said that Russia is in Ukraine defending Christianity. Did she say anything about the evangelicals that Russia has persecuted? No. Did she say anything about the evangelicals that the Russian Orthodox Army murdered in occupied territory? And when I say murdered, I mean murdered? No. Did he say anything about the MPs that had their stomachs cut open and dumped in the river, or the Baptist churches that were destroyed, or the Protestant churches that were destroyed and then had military bases put on top of them, scaring all the Protestants and other Christian denominations out of occupied territory? No. And these are the type of denominations that overwhelmingly, Baptist, Protestant, evangelical, make up her district and the people that support her. But because the Ukrainian government, whether good, bad, whatever you want to call it, is wary of the fact that the Russian Orthodox Church has been used as part of the Russian intelligence apparatus to spy around the world, including in the United States. By the way, we've intercepted the documents as their spies were coming into the United States, showing that they were trying to use the Russian Orthodox Church to spy within the United States. And that's the United States. That's an ocean away. Ukraine's right there, and it's full of Orthodox Christians. We've seen these priests get caught weapons smuggling. They have used the Orthodox Church in this way. Does that mean you can oppress Christians? Of course not. Does that mean you can go arrest anybody who's a part of that denomination? Of course not. But Ukraine is facing a struggle of existential survival, and priests are getting murdered, not having their church leases not renewed, and then passed over to the Ukrainian church, the Ukrainian version of this church. That's very different than the types of murders that are going on in occupied territory that she's never complained about. It's just so hypocritical. Continuing. All money in the bill is to be reduced to zero and instead provided to FEMA to help Hawaii. Another one. All money in this bill is supposed to be reduced to zero and instead be provided to FEMA to give to East Palestine. Okay, fine. I guess she just wants 2 Palestines to be getting bombed by artillery shells. Why would they need shells? Why would they need shells? Why would they need? Did she just see something called Palestine and said, move military equipment in, quick, hurry, send the tanks. There's a Palestine in America. Go, go, go. Why? What would we do with these things? What would we do with all these Vietnam era troop? How would that help? We would do nothing. It would do nothing. Oh, and this is the last one. Use the money to deport people. Sorry, Ukraine, we were going to help you, but then we decided we were just going to deport people instead with all the money. Why? Just introduce other legislation to do separate things. This is all completely unrelated. Is this how we're going to do legislation moving forward? Oh, the Republicans wanted to pass some economic thing that's overwhelmingly supported? Well, unless they pass this law legalizing marijuana in all 50 states, we're not going to allow it. Wait, but that's unrelated. That seems a little unfair that we'd have to sign on the marijuana legalization to have a responsible conversation about the economy. Nope, that's how it works now. Everything's just leverage for other negotiations and other debates. God, wasn't the whole point of having Mike Johnson and the Mag Gates, the Freedom Caucus critiques of the Republican establishment is they're sick of all the bundling. They're sick of taking all these pieces of legislation and making you have to vote on all of it together. Even if you don't support certain parts of it, you got to cut it up. And then immediately when they get the chance to engage in that type of bundling together in order to sabotage an effort, immediately they do it. Immediately they do it. There's no principle attached to it. Also, there was one funny moment in a committee hearing because Marjorie was just kind of spamming these things out, but she's not going to go out there and like defend them. And so this is one of the moments we got of congressmen being like, so are we gonna talk about the space laser amendment? Check this out.
Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion.
Mr. Chairman, so no more witnesses? I was hoping Marjorie Taylor Greene would come and talk about her space lasers amendment. Anyway, but she's not here, so I will.
Without objection, the committee stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
I wanted to hear about the space laser amendment. Come on, I wanted to hear about it too. White Powder, thank you so much for the tier 1 sub. I appreciate it. I wanted to hear about it too. But those weren't the only ones. Here's one more from Marjorie Taylor Greene. She thought of a new idea today, which is submitting an amendment so that Ukraine aid directs Biden to withdraw from NATO. Again, it's just completely unrelated amendments just to fill the airspace and try to sabotage the effort. This isn't legislating. This is just shit posting in Congress. That's what this is. If she wants to do this on your podcast. Go do it on your podcast as you talk about how woke the children's cartoons are and how, oh my God, I can't believe they did this to Ghostbusters, or oh my God, Warhammer 40K. I get all the clicks and the updates. We're talking about the largest war in Europe in World War II, and it's all just a meme. Where's the other one that I was thinking about this issue? Here's another one. John Rose had submitted an amendment to the Ukraine aid bill, another Republican. Aid money is only to be expended $1 billion at a time for every additional mile of border wall that's constructed. Now, again, this is just playing legislative games with the lives of a lot of people, but let's play this game. Fine. Let's do it this way. For every mile of border fence that we do, or maybe there will be a compromise of half a mile, $1 billion can be sent to Ukraine. Then I'm going to get a bunch of fencing, and I'm just going to start doing circles in the middle of Nevada. Circles and circles and circles and circles. Then I can get a good 200, 250 miles. I have a lot of bright ideas. Continuing. Oh, I think there's, is there any more? Actually, you know what? I think that's all of the amendments. So let's actually look at MTG weighing a motion to vacate in reaction to Mike Johnson finally moving forward on the Ukraine aid that he should have moved forward on 6 months ago.
It's unprecedented. This has never happened in history, and it's completely wrong. He owes our conference the truth, and he owes Republicans answers.
Does that mean you will go forward today? Will you go forward today?
I'm waiting to find out what's going to happen.
What's holding you back?
I'm a responsible person.
You spoke to the speaker.
I'm a responsible person, unlike those Ukrainians eating the organs of babies.
What was that conversation?
God, he does not look happy. I don't think I've ever seen Matt Gaetz this bad. Maybe it's just his suit combination. Maybe it's just a suit. I don't know, but he looks like he's kind of dead inside. He's got crack eyes.
Conversation like
tense.
Why?
Just like the tired eyes from somebody who's been awake for a very long time. Sorry, continuing.
Because we don't want to pass this bill. We sought clarification that a change to the motion to vacate threshold would not be in the rule, and we did not get the answer that we wanted.
So this is very significant here, Dana, because the way this process is expected to work, first you have to approve a rule in the House. That actually sets the parameters for the floor debate, allows it to happen along straight party lines. Typically, that procedural vote, the rule, happens when Republicans vote for it, Democrats vote against it. This time, there are expected to be many Republicans on the hard right who are going to vote against it, meaning they need Democrats to carry it over the finish line. That will set the stage for the vote on the larger overall aid package on Saturday. But embedded in that rule could be that change for the motion to vacate, making it.
So right here, what they're talking about, and this is important because this is another part, I forgot to mention this. This is another part of the debate, is Mike Johnson sees the writing on the wall with how his party's operating with such a small majority, and having it so one person do a motion to vacate kind of sets him into chaos again and again and again and again and again. And when just three people could probably derail their chances of going into 2024 pretty massively. That's what Marjorie Taylor Greene is also responding to. And what Matt Gaetz is responding to is Mike Johnson making it harder to do a motion to vacate, which would give their fringe a lot less leverage and would free him up to make deals with Democrats more often, knowing that the Freedom Caucus couldn't just pull a lever, bringing an end to his speakership.
Harder to oust a sitting speaker, and that is the rub. That is the source of tension right now on the far right. So if Johnson goes forward with that, he is inviting a fight with the right flank of his party, but he can rely on Democrats to carry it over the finish line, and essentially Democrats to keep him in this position. So
I want to show a response to Marjorie Taylor Greene that I'm not a huge Moskowitz fan, Jared Moskowitz, because sometimes it just feels a little snarky. But the snark, if they're going to legislatively shitpost, then I guess we got to get into like a shitpost off with Republicans. And so he did this speech, and then he followed it up by introducing a resolution, which I just thought was beautiful. Listen to him talking about comments made by Greene, saying that, and one of the things she said was that supporting Ukraine aid was anti-Semitic because then you're supporting the Nazis. Mind you, she said that the Russians were defending Christianity as they were murdering Christians in occupied territory. The Russians send neo-Nazis into Ukraine to do denazification. No words about that. But now Ukraine's a Nazi state being led by a Jewish man trying to join the EU, which would enshrine certain protections under the law for minority groups that don't even exist currently and would expand. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense. Like Svoboda is like the farthest right party in the Ukrainian parliament. They have one seat. To just say Nazi Ukraine is to accept Russian propaganda on its face, because Russian propaganda is to paint all of Ukrainian society as Nazis, as Banderites, as these far crazy radical nationalists, in order to desecrate and slander the Ukrainian independence movement, the Ukrainian sovereignty movement, Ukraine being an independent state. Because if they could just say, oh, all of Ukrainianism is just dumb Nazism and horrible nonsense, then you can be like, see, they can't manage their own affairs, we have to go in. It's like if I just go over and say, oh, what, you think Iraq can manage its own affairs? They're just all like, Muslim savages, all Islamists, and they're going to... If you slander the people and make it so that they're all unreasonable and unable to govern themselves, then you can justify violence against them more easily. Because who wouldn't want to go and kill Nazis, especially with the history of Nazism against Russia, but also against Ukraine? Ukraine has suffered a lot under Nazism. Ukraine was supposed to be the center of the Lebensraum program. It has really deep, dark, rich soil that helps grow tons of crops that the Nazis wanted for Lebensraum. If there's any people that have suffered under Nazism, it's definitely the Ukrainians, which also makes, I think, the attacks on them in this way particularly vile, especially as the Russians are sending Nazis into Ukraine like Rusich to fight them. But Moskowitz wanted to bring this up as well, and I wanted to show his response to it and the amendment that he proposed.
Russians. Now, I want to address something else that went on in this committee by another member. And I say this as someone whose grandparents escaped the Holocaust. So my grandmother was part of the Kindertransport out of Germany. Her parents were killed in Auschwitz. My grandfather, her husband, escaped Poland from the pogroms. The idea that we pretend that behavior is acceptable and regular. There are no concentration camps in Ukraine. They're not taking babies and shooting them in the air because they're Jewish. There's no gas chambers. There's no.
Did you know I actually celebrated my first Passover in Ukraine with my Jewish friends who invited me over to a Passover celebration. I never been to. I was raised Protestant. I never been to Passover, and so I went over there. We saw a local synagogue. It was very beautiful. We went back. We celebrated Passover, and it was very lovely. And I remember at the end of the celebration, I was like, God damn! I celebrated my first Passover in the Reich. Who would have thought?
Ovens. They're not railing people in. They're not ripping gold out of people's mouth. They're not taking stuff out of their home. They're not trying to erase a people. They're Ukrainians. Stop bringing up Nazis and Hitler. The only people who know about Nazis and Hitler are the 10 million people and their families who lost their loved ones. Generations of people who were wiped out.
In large part, Ukrainians, by the way.
It is enough of this disgusting behavior.
Like, Zelensky celebrated the victory over Nazism. Like, I remember watching like him give like a huge speech about like our people bled to destroy the I forgot what he called it, like the plague of Nazi fascist ideology. Zelensky is like a neoliberal if I've ever heard of one. He's like the most like free markets are the solution. He's like, oh, leave it. Everybody could, live on their own. There's not a bone of Nazism in his body, man.
Using Nazis as propaganda. You want to talk about Nazis? Get yourself over to the Holocaust Museum. You go see what Nazis did.
Remember when Marjorie Taylor Greene had to go to the Holocaust Museum and apologize? Can we get that clip out here now that she's calling other people Nazis? Can we get that clip out? 1 second. MTZ Holocaust Museum, because she compared vaccines to the Holocaust. I remember this.
I have made a mistake, and it's really bothered me for a couple of weeks now, and so I definitely want to own it. This afternoon, I visited the Holocaust Museum. The Holocaust is...
Apparently, the Holocaust Museum is not enough for her. It's not enough to learn.
The Holocaust is...
I'm sorry. Look, I'm not trying to be too mean or too cruel or too spiteful here, but the idea of looking at the public after you had a scandal for comparing the Holocaust to like COVID-19 like masks, which is what she did, and being like, look, I respect the suffering. I mean, the Holocaust. Whoa. Just that. The Holocaust. Wow, I mean, I can't think of a stronger condemnation of the Holocaust than the Holocaust. She should have, honestly, I don't believe her if she doesn't add a finger wag and a what's that one meme I saw a while ago of like, oh, I'm reading like a book on like the history of the Third Reich and it's got a big swastika on it, so when I'm on the train I just constantly go like to make sure people know that I don't agree with what I'm reading, because people are like, why have a swastika on your book? Oh my God, I'm sorry. It's just embarrassing. It's just embarrassing. Like, the Holocaust. Oof. Rough, Chief.
The Holocaust is... There's nothing comparable to it. It's...
Oh, except for apparently Ukraine, eh?
It happened and, over 6 million Jewish people were murdered. More than that, there were not...
Like, how do you even open your mouth on Nazis and the Holocaust again after having to go out and apologize, after going to have to make a work visit to the Holocaust Museum because of your behavior? Okay. Anyway, moving on. The reason I was talking about Jared Moskowitz is that it's less about that clip and more about this, which he introduced. So he wants to he introduced an amendment to the Ukraine bill to challenge all her amendments, which was to, number one, rename the Marjorie Taylor Greene office to the Neville Chamberlain Room, in reference to Neville Chamberlain from the United Kingdom, who was accosted by history due to the kind of appeasement policies he was engaging with the Germans. And number two, appoint Marjorie Taylor Greene as Vladimir Putin's special envoy to the United States. Look, Moskowitz a lot of times goes into like a lot of resist lib, like trolling, and sometimes I roll my eyes at it. But this one gave me a chuckle. He wins me on this one. He won me over on this one. This one gave me a chuckle. Also, if you're wondering what the Russians think of all this, if the Russians are like, Marjorie's not with us at all. What do you mean? This is just slanderous attacks on this woman to say that she's with us. She's not with us. Here's what Russian state TV had to say. And this is not like this is not like the Fox Network podcast. This is like main hour Russian state TV broadcast in the millions of rooms. Listen to this about Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is proposing for the U.S. to withdraw from NATO. She believes that Americans should help Putin win.
She believes that Americans should help Putin win. Seems the Russians have an idea of which side she's on. But let's go through some other people. I don't want to stick on Marjorie Taylor Greene for too long. You don't want to give her too much attention. Lauren Boebert is somebody who's also not very happy. The play fondler, who is, I guess, mostly known to me because she got fondled and gave a fondling, was grabbing the crotch of her date at a Beetlejuice play and was vaping to the point that her groping and vaping and loud behavior got her kicked out of the event. She's also, oh my God, I don't want to get into all the scandals. Point is, though, she barely lost re-election. She now moved over another district and is now facing a tough race to be the nominee in that new district and win because the Republican Party decided to move her due to the fact that she was not a strong candidate, and she shouldn't have been losing considering how, what district she was in. She shouldn't have been able to get that close of a race with Democrats. This is what she had to say about everything that's going down.
Do you have confidence in the speaker?
No, I don't have confidence in the speaker, unfortunately. We have been in multiple meetings, multiple hours of meetings with him. And, it's one thing to say, I like this idea, I wish I could, but he is the Speaker of the House, and he has that authority to move forward with a package that actually works for America.
Actually works for a package for America. What package is that? You've had 6 months to propose it, and this is what you give, and you're like, no. How about another 8 months? How do you think war works? Do you think we could have just been like, Normandy, D-Day? How about we just put it off a few years? Let's really work it out. Come on. Just spoke with Matt Gaetz, this is from John Hudson, who just got off the phone with Speaker Johnson. Gaetz said he now anticipates that Ukraine aid will pass, an outcome that he has long sought to avoid. He expresses dismay given his influential role in delaying aid thus far, which I would say puts a lot of the blood on his hands. This was abject surrender. This was abject surrender. That's ironic considering what he wants the Ukrainians to do. Speaking of Matt Gaetz, though, we do have some audio of him, and my God, he is not happy, and for me, it's a little euphoric.
For hours last night and proposed different paths for the speaker that would have avoided the abject surrender represented by his strategic choice here. There's no other way to describe it. It's surrender.
By the way, those other options, I think half of them probably included, okay, how about we abandon the Ukraine? Okay, well, how about we abandon Ukraine in a funny hat? Well, how about we abandon Ukraine and stop the investigation into, my sexual misconduct? Okay, well, no, then how about, come on, man. Come on. You've had 6 months. You've had 6 months. You've got enough blood on your hands. I'm sorry you can't bloody them a little bit more.
Surrender. It's disappointing. I won't support it.
It's disappointing. It's completely detached from what our base wants, what our voters want. The strategy is not to try. I think the strategy is to fall on his sword.
Come on, get over yourselves. Moving forward, that's not the only one that's not happy with how this is going. Donald Trump Jr., the son of Donald Trump, he also is going after representatives in the GOP who is pushing for Ukraine aid. Why are these GOP losers like Representative McCall pushing a bill that would do the bidding of Democrats and hurt my father's ability to negotiate an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine? McCall is a globalist who puts America last. J.D. Vance puts America first. So now I don't know if just Donald Trump has never negotiated. Well, he certainly has never negotiated, a geopolitical situation or like a war or negotiated diplomacy. But usually in negotiations, you want to have something called leverage. And if the Ukrainians have no weapons, then I would say, well, they don't have much leverage in negotiations. And if the Ukrainians are the side that we're going to be negotiating on the behalf of or backing up when they're doing the negotiating, which is what I would hope we would do, it would probably be useful if the Ukrainians didn't have the option of dying now and continuing the struggle, or negotiating a deal, maybe dying later, but hoping the Russians will. They need weapons to defend themselves, to make the Russians say, it's not worth it to continue, might as well pack up and go home. Or, you know what, this deal doesn't give us everything we wanted as Russia, and it gives us very little, or maybe even a full withdrawal, but it's not worth it. That's what you would want in negotiations. You usually want force, you want leverage, and in this instance, leverage comes in the form of hard military power, because that is what the Russians are going to respect here. And we know they have to respect it, because if it goes boom on their army, then whether or not they want to deny it or not, it happened. That's reality. And, you know, accepting truth might be hard, but it is what it is. And so we want to increase that leverage, but Donald Trump Jr. would rather enter the presidency with Ukraine on the ropes, just so what? He can force the Ukrainians to come to the table? See, this is not, in his mind, it's not, oh, we're with the Ukrainians who are trying to get them the best deal. In his mind, it's how can we, like, strong arm the Ukrainians, get them to the table to do whatever we want, while also having the Russians, you know, get enough to be satisfied so we can just put an end to it. Assuming, in his mind, the Ukrainians will just take whatever the United States gives them, and they won't just continue fighting without American support, which would be the worst case scenario, which him and his father would be flirting with, and said, if said thing was to come to pass, if said advice was to come to pass, and he just didn't pass anything up until next year. Continuing. Oh man, we have so much. But let's stop there, because I do want to make a point that the GOP isn't completely made up of either pro-Russia people, anti-Ukraine people, etc. And there's a lot of Republicans that are making evident that they understand that the party does have a Russophilia problem. Listen to this.
No more artillery. If we do not do this, the Russians will be in Kyiv. Unfortunately, a few of my colleagues would like to see the Russians win. I don't know why that is the case. I think it's a terrible thing.
Man, I remember a few weeks ago hearing Republican representatives say that we have Republicans arguing Russian propaganda on the House floor, and then it's embarrassing. And then having other Republicans ask about it, and they say, yeah, it's basically true. And now, as we get closer, we have them introducing Russian propaganda on the House floor in the form of amendments. And now we have to have another wave of Republicans come out and say, yeah, we got a Russian propaganda problem. I mean, I think Representative Dan Crenshaw, who is particularly unliked by the people against Ukraine aid, and I disagree with a lot of his foreign policy. I disagree with a lot of his domestic policy as well. But he came out, and I think he put it pretty succinctly from the Republican, I think, Reaganite position that he represents more. Listen to this.
I guess their reasoning is they want Russia to win so badly that they want to oust the speaker over it. I mean, it's a strange position to take, you know, I think they want to be in the minority too. I think that's an obvious reality. I'm still trying to process all the bullshit. So
still trying to process all the bull. They want, number one, what he said, I think he put it very succinctly, that they want Russia to win so bad that they want to oust the speaker over it. I don't know if that's true for all of them. Some of them might just be principled isolationists. But for people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'm leaning towards that now. As for that second part he put forward, which was,
you know, I think they want to be in the minority too.
If you're someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, it is probably more profitable to be in the minority, able to scream on your podcast and ask for donations to fight against the Biden administration, be in the resistance, quote unquote. It could be more profitable for your podcast. And so if you're mostly interested in good PR moves and moving up the ladder and less legislating, then, you know, there could be a motivation, just sabotage efforts if it means upping your own cred in the base, even if it means you don't actually get anything done. Moving forward, though, 1 second. Is this the last one? I do want to show that there are others that are pushing out back against the idea of doing a recall vote, because they know, again, within the Republican Party that if they do another recall vote, that will be disastrous for Republican electoral outcomes come 2024. I think we got some right here, some more Republican responses. Yeah, right here.
There are others behind Massey as well.
Oh, that's Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that her and Massey are not the only two that might sign on to the recall paperwork to actually call for a recall of Mike Johnson, because the only two that have signed on is her and Thomas Massey, but she's saying that there's others as well. But then listen to this.
Johnson's defenders warning Greene and Massey.
It would be a very bad idea. The concept of another motion to vacate is an utter waste of time.
I think it would be horrible. I think it would be horrible for our conference. I think it's horrible for the country, too.
Johnson soon can only afford to lose one GOP vote along party lines, meaning he would almost certainly need Democrats to save him.
I think it's unlikely I would support vacating it. We'll see. I mean, the big thing is I want to vote on Ukraine.
The GOP revolt comes as Johnson announced his long-awaited plan to advance a foreign aid package.
So there is support for Johnson within the party, and it seems that everybody who's floating the idea of a vacate all say under it in subtext, like, well, I understand that a lot of people are worried about vacating, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's kind of like Marjorie Taylor Greene is on a boat, and she's holding a match to a bomb. And yeah, that's leverage. People are scared of her lighting the bomb, but everybody else also knows that she's in the boat as well. That is, unless she has another dinghy, and for her, that's her dumb fucking podcast that she could jump into and be like, yay, this is all I cared about. Then maybe if she actually sinks their legislative majority, because she doesn't care about it, just was to be on the podcast, then maybe she will light the bomb. But that will probably come with her being unbelievably isolated within the Republican Party, especially if it leads to them losing the House majority, which there's a good chance they're already on the path to losing anyway. Now, Donald Trump, of course, had to open his mouth on the issue. We had gotten some impression from Mike Johnson that Donald Trump was at least okay with him moving this stuff forward, due from the fact that he had a meeting with Mike Johnson and said he's doing the best job that he can. But more recently, when asked about a motion to vacate and stuff like that, he was a lot more shady on an answer. He's like, oh, we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see whether we'll support Johnson through the Ukraine stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But then he tweeted this out. So we're starting to get a little bit less confidence that Trump is going to keep his mouth shut because he's opening his mouth. But we have yet to see him put his finger directly on the scale to say no Ukraine aid. So that hasn't happened yet. But he still said this. And honestly, it just feels like he hasn't updated his talking points. Why isn't Europe giving more money to help Ukraine? Why is it that the United States is over $100 billion into the Ukraine war? By the way, we're not. More than Europe. And $100 billion into the Ukraine war, more than Europe. Oh, my God. What a number. We're going to talk about that in a second. And we have an ocean between us as separation. Why can't Europe equalize or match the money put in by the United States of America in order to help a country in desperate need? As everyone agrees, Ukraine's survival and strength should be much more important to Europe than us. But it is also important to us. Get moving, Europe. In addition, I am the only one who speaks for, quote unquote, me. And while it is a total mess caused by crooked Joe Biden and the incompetent Democrats, if I were president, this war would have never started. Number one, I like how no matter what the post is about whatever the topic is, he always has to make it about himself. Largest war in Europe since World War II. History clashing. Could be the beginning of a new age of warfare with drone technology. The post-Cold War era seems to be coming to an end. It is a war that could define the next centuries of human development, could spell the future for Europe, but not only Europe, the future of the geopolitical scene as a whole, as the nations of the world view to see what the United States will do. And it's still about Donald Trump. It's still about Donald Trump. That's the first thing. As for the $100 million thing, this number is fake on multiple levels. And it makes me feel like not only did he not update his talking points, but that he's just making these numbers up, which he's done before. He's just made numbers up before. This is just a new number he's made up. First off, Europe has given more aid to Ukraine than the United States already. And they have promised, I think, almost double that for aid to the future. Just passed like $54 billion a few months ago, and are now looking at passing another $100 billion in favor of Ukraine aid. But of total commitment, as of right now, on top of commitments into the future, Europe has surpassed us. Go look at the Kiel Institute numbers if you don't believe me. That's my source. If you guys want to go look at the Kiel Institute Ukraine aid tracker. If you don't believe my top numbers, if you think I'm just some Democrat shill that's trying to lie to you about these cowardly Europeans, I've been to Paris, okay? I've talked to the public there. They're still generally in support of Ukraine. The public there is sending aid. The government's sending aid there. You Germans are sending aid. The Danish are sending aid. The Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians are sending aid. Not only at a larger per capita rate when we're talking about many of these countries, but now in a total rate as well for what has already been sent and commitments into the future, which then doubles the amount of aid. I think if you include commitments into the future, Europe has sent more than double than the United States to Ukraine aid, has sent and committed to more than the United States, more than double. You can go look at the numbers yourself. But not only that, he says here, the United States is over $100 billion into the Ukraine war more than Europe. If I was to be generous, 75 billion would be the number I would give. And I don't agree with that number. I don't agree with that number because we're listing a lot of the weapons we're sending at their original construction price, which was not fair. And we're sending over like old Vietnam troop carriers, which we were never going to put into service again, but we're just including it as cash amounts, which I don't think, again, it's not really, there's things that I don't agree with how it's counted, but let's put all that to the side and just stick with the 75 billion. He says United States over $100 billion into the Ukraine war more, meaning that if what he was saying here is true, he's not saying we've spent over $100 billion, which in and of itself wouldn't be true, because that would be a lie. That would be inflating our numbers. But he's saying that it's $100 billion more than the Europeans have committed to. And if we were to go to the Kiel Institute tracker, if we were to make these numbers a reality, oh my God, I wish. If we were to make these numbers a reality, let's say that Trump was not lying, and we were to go look at the numbers. Let's see, accept all cookies, I don't care. The Kiel Institute Ukraine support tracker. This is what I wanted. Next scheduled update. I don't need the next scheduled update. I just want the Ukraine. Here it is. If we would have, no, that's just percentages. I want total amounts. Okay, here we go. If that was true, then that would mean that the United States would not just have to be at the $75 billion mark or near the $75 billion mark. They would have to take the 77 here, add the 17 here, the 9 here, the 8 here, all of this all together, and then meet that, which it's not at yet, and then at $100 billion. So that would mean we would probably be near, if we also include commitments into the future, probably like $300 to $300 billion worth of aid to Ukraine when we've sent 75. So Donald Trump's just off by a margin of, I don't know, 300 to 400%. Wasn't this guy a businessman? Wasn't that his claim to fame? Just numbers just don't add up. This is Scott Steiner math, man. But despite the talk from Trump, despite the talk from Marjorie, despite the talk from all these people, Mike Johnson all of a sudden is talking about the Ukraine invasion, the invasion of Ukraine, as if it's a defining moment of history that will determine the fate of the world. He's like, his tone has shifted almost instantaneously. Listen to this.
Why are you willing to risk losing your job over this Ukraine funding?
Listen, my philosophy is you do the right thing and you let the chips fall where they may. If I operated out of fear over a motion to vacate, I would never be able to do my job. Look, history judges us for what we do. This is a critical time right now, a critical time on the world stage. I could make a, I could make a selfish decision and do something that's different, but I'm doing here what I believe to be the right thing. I think providing lethal aid to Ukraine right now is critically important. I really do. I really do believe the intel and the briefings that we've gotten that I believe Xi and Vladimir Putin and Iran really are an axis of evil. I think they're in coordination on this. I think that Vladimir Putin would continue to march through Europe if he were allowed. I think he might go to the Balkans next. I think he might have a showdown with Poland or one of our NATO allies.
Moldova, I think, would be the most obvious candidate. It already has a Russian illegal military deployment there. It's technically not in NATO. And while Romania is increasing its armed forces, as Romania kind of claims Moldova, Moldovans feel really deeply tied to Romania. I don't want to get into the history. It's a bunch of Soviet nonsense. I don't want to get into it right now. But that would be the most obvious candidate, since there's already Russian troops illegally deployed there. And if they were to march through Ukraine, you know, then they would have a direct land bridge into Moldova, which would protect their Transnistrian enclave.
To put it bluntly, I would rather send bullets to Ukraine than American boys. My son is going to begin in the Naval Academy this fall. This is a live fire exercise for me, as it is so many American families.
It's a good argument.
This is not a game. It's not a joke. We can't play politics of this. We have to do the right thing. And I'm going to allow...
Wish he could have said this 6 months ago, and so maybe these shells and other munitions, and while, of course, the shells have to be produced for us before the sent, we could have had a better impact in the Battle of Avdiivka. Maybe they wouldn't have won it. Maybe they wouldn't have held them off, but it could have maybe delayed them another month, another 2 months, increase Russian casualties, make it so they couldn't advance as much as they have, even though, again, we're measuring this in like 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer, 3 kilometer. We're not talking about, oh, this major city has fallen. We're talking about this village has fallen this month, this village has fallen in 2 weeks after that. But still, the risk of a breakthrough increases the worse the munitions crisis becomes. And it makes it harder for the Ukrainians to make the casualties on Russian soldiers that would be necessary for them to not be able to sustain their offensives, or for the Ukrainians to begin to crawl back on territory.
Opportunity for every single member of the House to vote their conscience and their...
Also, I saw that thank you letter from Kiev in Gutter Chat and Twitch chat earlier. I forgot to give you a shout out, but thank you. I appreciate that lovely message. I hope you're in Kiev. I'm in Kiev. We're both within the same city. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Don't come murder me. I'd appreciate it. But thank you, Kitsune Nick. I appreciate it.
Their will on this, and I think that's the way this institution is supposed to work, and I'm willing to take personal risk for that, because we have to do the right thing, and history will judge us.
History will judge us. But this isn't the only thing I already watched this one. But he also went on TV to make the case as well, and I wanted to play a clip of that.
You got to be tough on your adversaries. The problem is, you and I both know, Larry, this president is projecting weakness on the world stage, and that's why all of our nation's enemies are acting so provocatively. For the Israel example, I mean, President Biden and Chuck Schumer have been criticizing Israel and appeasing Iran. The strategy should be exactly the opposite, that we should be helping Israel, and they've been turning their backs on them. And then, of course, this encourages Xi and encourages China. When they see that we're not going to stand strong and we're not going to put the flag in the ground, so to speak, and hold the line, they're going to act. They're going to move. We're concerned about what China may do in Taiwan. We talk about it all the time. We're certainly concerned about Iran's open aggression now against Israel, our dear friend and ally. And Russia, of course, is still on the march in Ukraine. We have to stand strong. A strong America is good for the entire world. We bring stability and peace. The perception that America is strong is important and has been since World War II, and we cannot let down on that responsibility.
Okay, so the first thing, I would appreciate the tonal shift 6 months ago, and he didn't delay this because, again, it's the same bill. If he would have proposed it 6 months ago, probably could have passed that. And if Kevin McCarthy was going to sink, he probably should have passed it before sinking anyway. But we could have tried something like this then. We could have. But it seems like we had to wait until the situation was critical and there was a 10-to-1 ammunition deficiency. And we wanted to wait until we made the investments to increase it. But it just felt like waiting to just hope that a solution would fall out of the sky, which it never did, to get him out of the conundrum he boxed himself into after trying to make those immigration reform requirements tied to Ukraine aid for political points with the fringe that you were never, ever, ever going to please on Ukraine aid. So that's the first thing. Second thing here is what he's talking about is the projection of strength to increase our deterrence. Maybe compellence, but probably mostly deterrence. If you spend 6 months squabbling over sending aid that is crucial for the Ukrainians to win the war, then the Russians don't view that as, oh, even if we get the aid through, they're still going to view that as a moment of weakness. They're still going to view that as, oh, the weakness of democracy manifesting and how they tried to deal with the aid conversation. That America's internal divisions, what the Russians have been purposely trying to foster, is leading to people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is pushing their line in Congress, who Mike Johnson has to listen to in these hearings in these meetings, these high-profile Republican meetings, to how slim the majority is, in large part because of the tomfoolishness of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others. This is going to blockade, and they are going, for at least a period of time, that the Russians feel like that they can take advantage of. And then it makes people like South Korea think like, wait, could we have, if immigration is getting tied to Ukraine security, could we have like a don't say gay bill tied to our security? Like, oh, sure, we'll go help South Korea in this, existential struggle against the North if they do an offensive, after we passed a bill attached to a don't say gay law, or if it was the other side, okay, sure, we'll help so-and-so country, only after you legalize marijuana in all 50 states in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of a war, trying to solve all these extremely divisive issues as directly attached to this. It's not that you shouldn't have solved it. It should have been separate, because the issues are separate. I mean, it seems like on principle they agree that should vote on separate issues separately, because that was their solution for at least the House before rebundling for the Senate, so it's mostly performative anyway. But why would that not apply originally when you were asking for the immigration? And then we had the 5 months of negotiating that went down the drain. I left Ukraine with this issue not settled, and then I come back Ukraine the next year, and we still haven't passed Ukraine aid. That is, in large part, a failure of the Republican majority. I would say that's the lion's share, the fault, if not almost the entirety of it, is the fault of the Republican majority. And you're going to talk about deterrence? This is the main way deterrence is being hurt. I would even go as far as to say that the damage that was done by those 6 months will take a very long time, maybe a decade, maybe more, to undo that damage, so that America's, whether you want to call them adversaries, geopolitical rivals, regional rivals, countries that they have disagreements with, will think that, oh, maybe America's Congress during a security crisis will just come in and say, nope. Not even because the majority of congressmen oppose an issue, because again, the majority of congressmen always supported Ukraine aid. The majority of senators always supported Ukraine aid. It kind of sucks to focus on these fringe freaks, because again, the majority of American legislators agree with Ukraine aid and the presidency, both in the House and the Senate. And so if that's the standard, and our national security establishment as well, and it still gets blocked by a few fringe people, I mean, they're going to see that as a weakness. And they're going to see if they can exploit that weakness. And the Russians, for a long time, have said that fostering disinformation and fostering societal and racial divisions in the United States is a part of their strategy. I mean, the Russians would organize Black Lives Matter protests and then counter-protests to organize at the same place. The organizer never showed up because the dude was in St. Petersburg, because he was working for Yevgeny Prigozhin's old group, which is still pumping out misinformation. So they're looking at this exact area as an area of weakness, and they're targeting it right now. And so if he's talking about projecting strength, he has done more than any other person for the last 6 months, or at least his party, as which he is a representative of, whether it was purposeful or not, have degraded American deterrence over the last 6 months, and have made it look like that if a crisis was to occur, we're going to sit on our hands for maybe 6 months to a year before we do anything. Now, we've been concentrating on Republicans, but I do want to highlight a few Democrats that have also responded to everything that's going on, because I want to go through a few of them, because it's good to see Democrats get a little bit of fire in the belly over the issue of Ukraine aid. I've been wanting them to get fire in the belly over this issue. It's the largest war in Europe since World War II. It's an incredibly consequential war. It's an ally that is looking to us for support. And the Republicans, who are supposed to be the national security people, are the ones that are failing on this issue. Democrats could take up the mantle here. They could really take up the mantle here, but it hasn't been a main focus as of recent due to the war between Israel and Hamas, and just due to other legislative priorities. But now that it's getting focused, we're seeing some Democrats get some fire in their belly over the issues. And I wanted to highlight, I think, 2 instances, and then talk about what the Democrat plan is going into the vote on Saturday, which is when this vote is going to be happening on the aid bill.
Sentence about border security. I sat in the White House, not in a classified meeting, where Republican colleagues said that we won't have Ukraine without bipartisan border security. And then you know what? We accomplished bipartisan border security. It wasn't, and it was, oh, you can shake your head all you want, but Democrats and Republicans voted for border security. And you know what? It was Donald Trump who said, don't give Biden a win. You think about that. Put that aside. This moment is now. The United States Senate, you can have all the views you want about the United States Senate, but hold them for this debate. It is now. It is about the United States House of Representatives. We have the opportunity to do what we do here, and that is to govern. And what are we doing in governing? Is to be a world leader. And for months and months, we have been diddling around where people are dying in Ukraine. Don't talk about what weapons we want to give them. We're not giving them what they need now, and it has been months in the coming. And we ought to today, immediately, we should have picked up that Senate bill, brought it to the floor, and voted on it immediately, and we would be out of here today in doing it. Let us not rewrite what is happening. The moment is ours, and if the House of Representatives abdicates its responsibility, yes, the history will write the story, and that it is on us. When we had that moment, we said no. I, for one, will not say no. I will.
The woman with the grimace hair is right. But this one I liked more. I just like this one more. I don't know why. I just like the passion in this woman's voice. And then we'll go into what the Democratic whip is saying. She's just the holding up of the Telegram post that she's taken off the internet and just posting on Twitter. Like she's one of these like rinky-dink Austin accounts. God, MTG is such a knuckle dragger.
As we talk about rhetoric, something else that was appalling to me was this insinuation that when you look at the Ukrainians, which is why we're having problems getting the funding that Ukraine needs, is because people in this chamber push misinformation and disinformation. They want to talk about the Ukrainians got all of these Nazis. Well, let me tell you something. You can find Nazis anywhere. You can find them right here in the United States. In fact, a bunch of the people that they're calling victims and prisoners of war, also known as convicted felons from January 6th. I have an article that I'd like to enter into the record by unanimous consent that says neo-Nazi January 6th rioter pleads guilty.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. So here's the point. We have people in this chamber that are actually causing just as much a threat, if not more of a threat, to our own country. We should be talking about holding our very own accountable for the misinformation and disinformation that they are spreading, whether it's coming out of China, whether it's coming out of Russia, or whoever is peddling it. It is a problem because right now what we see is that people are dying and we cannot get the support that we need from the public because they continue to peddle lies. And I'm tired of it because I didn't come to this chamber to play games. I came to this chamber to answer to the people, the American people, and to make sure that we keep the American people safe. And if we don't get something done, as they talk about the border, I do want to be clear, the only reason we haven't gotten funding for the border is because they killed, the House Republicans here, killed the bill that they actually sent us from the Senate side. If they want to do some work, let me tell you something, the Democrats are ready, and it seems like the Senate Republicans are ready too. They just need to get to it and stop peddling Putin's lies. Thank you, and I yield.
Damn, my goodness. We need more fire in the belly over these issues on the public display more often. We really do. I mean, it was for 6 months. Every day was so grueling. It's cathartic to kind of like have it over, at least for now, or at least soon to be over. We still got 48 hours. And I mean, things can happen in a 48-hour time period. Trump in the middle of the night decides, you know what? Let's have another chapter to this, a new arc on the Ukraine aid conversation. But this is the type of passion we need on this. This is the type of aggression we need on this. We need to say people are dying. It's a crisis. It's a war. You do not sit on your hands. Is this how the Republicans would respond if there's another security crisis? Do they know how to handle national security? If they can't even get their own house in order, how are you going to expect them to be able to handle these serious national security issues? If Mike Johnson is saying, oh, I can't deal with this national security issue right now, we need to pass the budget. House Speaker is supposed to be doing multiple things at the same time. Their House speakers is supposed to be exceptional. I know it's like, look, he wants the training wheels on, but it's, you know, it's a difficult job. You got to keep up. You got to keep up. You got to keep up. Lastly, I want to throw forward some information that we have on the Democratic strategy going into this Saturday to have a vote on this. House Minority Whip Catherine Clark told Democrats in a closed-door meeting today to keep, by the way, a House Minority Whip, for those, I know I have some Ukrainian viewers who might not know this, their job is to basically keep the Democrats almost like in line. Like they tell them and they say, hey, this is what we're doing going into this day. We're going to vote this way. This is the way it would be good for the party. Hey, you said you don't want to do that. Can I talk to you about your reservations? Why do you not agree with this, et cetera, et cetera. That's their job. They're, I don't know what to, they're like the sheepdog on a farm. House Minority Whip Catherine Clark told Democrats in a closed-door meeting today to keep their powder dry on whether they'd vote to save Mike Johnson as Speaker, according to 3 sources. The reason? Holding out, they believe, will give them leverage as Johnson finalizes his floor strategy in the rule governing floor debate on the overall foreign aid package, the sources added. I agree with it. I agree with it. I agree with it. But if they're doing that, that means we're not getting any rinky-dink amendments, and Johnson isn't going to throw anything in there and try to satisfy Marjorie like, oh, we're going to do a 10 billion reduction here, 10 billion reduction there. In fact, I think if there's any amendments that should be added, it should be amendments to help with more demining equipment. It should be amendments to like, hey, if we're asking the government to provide high ATACMS, which is what this bill also said, is one of the better parts of the bill, then there should be extra funds allocated with that so we can make sure that we get as many funds as possible to the most needed supplies like air defense and artillery shells, while also allocating money to help the Ukrainians increase their long-range strike capacity to undermine Russian logistics, undermine the bases where they're launching these attacks from. But then again, the United States might be a little shaky about approving ATACMS being used on Russian soil, on Russian bases. But hey, if you're telling them don't bomb the oil refineries, you need to be able to offer them something in return for that, something more than, please don't do it. It would be very nice. Don't destabilize Russia a little too much. Stop punching them back when they target your energy infrastructure. You got to offer them a little more. We're in the final run here, 48 hours. By the time this is on YouTube, it'll probably be 24 hours before the Ukraine aid vote. And so we're in this final lap. We're at the final gun. We're here. We should have been here 6 months ago. We should have been here even before 6 months ago, honestly. But we're here now. We can't change the past. We can only try to affect the future. The vote is this Saturday. If you have representatives that you don't know how they're going to vote or how they're pushing the House Speaker or the House Minority Leader, if there's a time to call them, this would be the last time to call them to make clear what you would like to see happen, which is support for Ukraine or not support for Ukraine. I have a diverse audience, but I think you guys know where I line up here. This has been pathetic. This has been humiliating as a country to display this type of ignorance by House members as they introduce Russian propaganda to the House floor and use fairy tales about organ harvesting and bioweapons labs, weapons of mass destruction, and Russia as being the savior of Christianity, which is old Russian nationalist propaganda about the Russian destiny of fighting the degeneracy, fighting this Enlightenment nonsense, and defending the Christian faith in Europe. It's old, nonsensical, like 200 and 250-year-old Russian propaganda that is being regurgitated out of the mouths of House members, those House members being the ones that have delayed it for so long. It's embarrassing we've had to wait so long. It's embarrassing we've had to listen to this nonsense, and it's embarrassing us on the world stage, which has real geopolitical implications that I don't think a lot of House members will fully realize until some time has passed and we can look in the rearview mirror and look at it all after the fact. Either way, it's better than not doing any more damage, I guess. But we've reached the final, I guess you could call it the final countdown, whatever you want to call it. We're here, we're queer, let's pass the aid.